Hey there, deep divers, and welcome to today's deep dive.
Into the fascinating
Oh,
and
yes.
maybe even a little mysterious world of financial astrology. Our
Our,
guide for this deep dive is The Lost Science, Esoteric Math and Astrology Techniques for the Market Trader
hmm
by M.G. Bucholtz.
Okay.
Now, Buchholz has walked the walk.
Okay.
He's a former financial advisor turned independent trader.
hmm
So he's not just theorizing here. What really grabbed my attention in this book is how it connects seemingly unrelated things.
Okay.
We're talking about the golden mean showing up in market cycles, how planetary movements might tie into price action, and even the idea of the New York Stock Exchange having its own astrological birth chart.
Wow.
To help us unpack all of this, we've got expert speaker joining us
Absolutely.
who can shed light on not just what Buchholz is saying, but the why behind it all.
It's certainly a different lens to view the markets through, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And even if some of these concepts seem a bit out there, I
Mhm.
think you'll find it's a journey worth taking.
I'm all about exploring new perspectives.
Good.
So let's start with this idea of the golden mean,
Okay.
also known as phi, or that symbol.
Right.
Now, you might be thinking, isn't that something from art class?
Hmm.
But apparently this number 1.618
Yeah.
is a recurring character in nature, architecture, even the human body. Want to see it in action right now?
Sure.
Take your wrist and measure the distance from your wrist to your fingertips.
Okay.
Got it. Now divide that by the distance from your elbow to your wrist.
Mm.
Chances are you're looking at something pretty close to the golden mean. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
What I'm curious about is how Buchholz takes this seemingly random number and connects it to market cycles.
Well, you have to understand, the golden mean has fascinated people for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
Ancient civilizations saw it as this symbol of harmony, of natural balance.
Okay.
So it's been used in art and design to create visually pleasing proportions,
Mm-hmm.
things that just feel right to the
Yeah.
human eye. Now, the idea that this same principle might be reflected in market cycles, that's where things get really interesting.
And Buchholz throws down some pretty compelling examples. He points to the TSX Composite Index between 2009 and 2011.
Right.
There was a significant rise, followed by retracement, of about 38%. And guess what?
What's that?
That 38% is pretty darn close to one of those inverse ratios tied to phi.
Oh, interesting.
But he doesn't stop there.
Oh, really?
He introduces this whole concept of the spiral calendar, which uses the golden sequence and these moons to track time.
Right.
And when you view that TSX example through this lens, the market movements seem to line up scarily well with this esoteric calendar. I mean, talk about food for thought.
Definitely intriguing.
Yeah.
And look, I'm all for exploring these kinds of connections,
Mm-hmm.
but it's crucial to remember that markets are like those giant multi-layered puzzles,
Right.
influenced by a ton of factors.
Yeah.
So while these golden mean links are fascinating, we've got to approach them with that healthy dose of, okay, that's cool, but let's not bet the farm just yet.
Right. Yeah.
Relation doesn't always equal causation, right?
Absolutely. It's like having an extra tool in your kit. Doesn't mean you use it for every job, but it's
Yeah.
there if you need it. But speaking of tools, this next concept had me wondering if Buchholz was secretly a time traveler.
You must be talking about the planetary transit lines.
Yes.
Go on, tell me. What has you thinking about time travel?
Well, Buchholz suggests that the actual degrees planets move can be translated into potential price points using something called the Wheel of 24. Now, I know what you're thinking. Sounds a little out there, right?
Yeah.
But hear me out. He uses this Wheel of 24 to plot lines for planets like Jupiter and Saturn, and in his examples, those lines seem to line up with actual support and resistance levels.
Okay.
He specifically points to the S&P TSX Composite Index and the euro currency.
Mhm.
So now I'm sitting here staring at these charts, wondering if there's some hidden code in the cosmos that's influencing prices.
It's certainly a compelling thought, and it taps into this age-old idea that these massive celestial bodies have a subtle influence on us, on our collective behavior. I mean, think about it. We've been observing the stars for millennia. Now, whether that translates to predicting exact price movements,
Yeah.
well, that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
But even if we don't take it literally, using this different lens to view the market can reveal things we might have otherwise missed. It's all about expanding our perspective.
I love that. It's like looking for those hidden patterns, those connections that most people might overlook. Okay, ready for another layer of this puzzle?
Bring it on. Buchholz has piqued my curiosity. What's the next piece of this lost science he reveals?
Get ready to dust off those math skills because we're diving into square root mathematics and the square of 9. Basically, it's a method for finding potential support and resistance levels. Think of them like price floors and ceilings
Right.
by applying some specific calculations to, well, price points. And the example he uses, get this, is BlackBerry. By using these square root calculations, he pinpoints specific price targets. And guess what?
What's that?
Those targets actually ended up being pretty darn accurate.
Wow. So he called that one, huh?
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's like he's got a crystal ball hidden
Ooh, I know.
somewhere.
It's a fascinating concept. And, this idea that numbers and their relationships hold a deeper meaning has been around for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just some random theory Buchholtz pulled out of a hat. Cultures throughout history have explored this very idea. The question is, are these calculations tapping into some fundamental pattern in the market, or are they just a really interesting coincidence? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It's like trying to decipher a secret code. And speaking of codes, Bucholtz introduces another tool called Gann lines, which also use square root math. And in his example with the gold bugs index, these Gann lines perfectly align with the 20 and 50-day moving averages, which, for those of you listening who aren't chart wizards, are basically lines that show you the average price over a set period. It's a way to smooth out the noise and spot trends.
I have to say, even if someone isn't convinced that these methods can predict the future,
Mm-hmm.
and to be clear, that's a big if,
Yeah.
the value here lies in the discipline they bring to a trader's approach. Instead of making impulsive decisions based on emotion, which, let's be honest, we all do sometimes, these tools like the square of 9 or Gann lines can provide a framework.
Right.
It's like having a set of guidelines to help you navigate those choppy market waters.
It makes sense. Even if you don't think it can predict the future, having that structure could help you avoid some costly mistakes.
Precisely. And it highlights the psychological aspect of trading, which, in my opinion, is just as important as the technical side.
It's about mastering your mindset as much as your strategy.
Yes.
Now, this next part is where things get really interesting for me because it challenges our very notion of time. We often think of market cycles starting at the beginning of the year, right? But what if there's a different starting point, one that's more in tune with, well, the cosmos? That's where the Gann box comes in.
You've got my attention, a different starting point for market cycles. Tell me more.
Imagine this. What if instead of January 1st, we sync our market clocks with nature's clock?
Yeah, okay.
Buchholtz proposes using the spring equinox, 0 degrees Aries for all you astrology buffs, as the real beginning of the cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And to visualize this, he uses the Gann box. Picture this structure with diagonal lines that intersect price action at these key points.
Mm-hmm.
He uses the gold bugs index again as an example, and it's pretty wild to see how the price movements interact with those Gann box lines. It's almost like they're bouncing off an invisible force field.
That's a fascinating way to look at it. We've gotten so used to our calendar year that we forget humans have been marking time by the seasons, by the stars, for far longer. Shifting our perspective on something as fundamental as time that could reveal patterns we'd otherwise miss, don't you think?
It's like realizing you've been looking at the map upside down this whole time. Suddenly, new routes appear.
Yeah.
And speaking of patterns, Buchholtz dives into the work of H.M. Gartley, who was apparently a bit of a legend in the world of market analysis. Rumor has it he might have even known W.D. Gann. Imagine those two swapping secrets.
Yeah, that would have been a conversation worth eavesdropping on.
Yeah.
But about Gartley, his work is all about spotting those repeating patterns in price action, right? Which aligns perfectly with this idea of history rhyming, if not repeating exactly.
Exactly. So Gartley starts with a pattern called ABCD, which sounds deceptively simple. It's about finding price ranges that are equal in size, but with specific retracements in between. He uses a rice futures chart to illustrate, and you can visually see how the price moves line up to create this ABCD formation. Now, for those listening who are thinking, okay, that's cool, but what's the takeaway? Imagine this. You spot this pattern forming. It could give you a heads up on potential buying or selling opportunities, maybe even before the crowd catches on.
It's like having a glimpse into the future,
Yeah.
or at least a possible future.
Right.
But patterns are one thing. Having the guts to actually act on them, and that's the real test, isn't
Oh,
it?
absolutely. It takes a certain kind of steel to trust those patterns, especially when the market is going crazy. And that's where Gartley's 222 patterns come in. These guys form either an M or a W shape on the chart. And Buchholtz uses some really clear visuals in the book. I'd highly recommend checking them out, by the way. He uses Potash Corp and Uranium Participation Corp as real-world examples showing how these M and W patterns played out. And then to make things even more precise, he adds this parallelogram overlay technique. It's like putting a frame around the pattern, giving you an even clearer picture of where those potential turning points might be.
It's all about pinpointing those moments of truth, right? Where the market takes a breath before deciding its next move.
Exactly. But here's the thing about patterns, and Buchholtz is very upfront about this. They're not foolproof. He calls it pattern failures, and he even gives examples using the Imani Dow futures and the Japanese yen. But even when those patterns don't play out perfectly, he shows how understanding phi and its ratios can still provide clues. It's like having a backup plan, even when your initial plan goes sideways.
And isn't that the key to navigating the market? Being adaptable, being able to adjust your course when conditions change. Because let's face it, the market throws curveballs and it's about being ready for them.
Speaking of curveballs, are you ready to bring the moon into the equation?
The moon. I thought we'd already touched on lunar cycles. What's Bucholtz got to say about our celestial neighbor?
Well, get this. He goes beyond just the lunar phases, full moon, new moon. He introduces this idea of the first trade date for a stock. It's basically the day a company's stock first starts trading on an exchange. And what's fascinating is that he links this first trade date to wait for it lunar events. He suggests that stocks that debuted on a full moon or a new moon might actually be more sensitive to those lunar cycles. It's like the moon imprinted on them or something.
That's a new one for me. But it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, think about all the things we associate the moon with. Tides, moods, even werewolves. Maybe there's a deeper connection to the market than we realize.
That's what I'm thinking. And he actually backs it up with examples.
Oh, really?
He uses Caterpillar and General Electric.
Okay.
Both had their first trade dates on a lunar event. And when you look at their price charts, there's this uncanny correlation between their price swings and those same lunar phases.
It makes you wonder if there's more to this market game than meets the eye. Almost makes you want to check the lunar calendar before making your next trade, doesn't it?
Right. Like, what if we've been missing a crucial piece of the puzzle this whole time? But hold on, there's more. Bucholtz then introduces the north node of the moon. Now, this isn't your everyday astrology talk, but stay with me. It has this cycle of roughly 18.6 years. And he connects that to get the 19-year business cycle that economists are always talking about.
The North Node is a pretty big deal in astrology. It's all about destiny, about growth, about those karmic paths we're supposed to be on.
Right.
So to think it might influence larger economic trends, well, that's not entirely out there.
And here's the kicker. When you look at the S&P 500, which is basically a snapshot of the entire U.S. stock market, major market turns seem to align with the North Node changing signs in the zodiac. It's like clockwork. Almost makes you wonder if there's some grand cosmic plan for the markets.
It's enough to give even the most diehard skeptic pause, right?
I know I'm rethinking everything I thought I knew about the market. Deep divers, welcome back. We're in the final stretch of our journey through the lost science. Expert speaker, I've got to hand it to Bucholtz. This book takes us places I never thought we'd go with market analysis.
It's been quite a ride. And whether or not you're ready to start drawing up astrological charts for your portfolio, I think the real value here is that Bucholtz challenges us to consider possibilities we might have dismissed before.
Totally. And even if someone isn't convinced by the astrology part, there are still some really solid takeaways about cycles, something any trader can learn from.
Absolutely. Bucholtz drives home the point that markets move in cycles. It's ingrained in their very nature. We've got the golden mean, planetary movements, lunar phases. They all point to this underlying rhythm. Now, whether these cycles are predictable with pinpoint accuracy is debatable, but recognizing their influence can be a game changer for how you approach the market.
It's like learning to read the waves before you surf. You might not catch every wave perfectly, but understanding those patterns gives you a major edge.
Exactly. And on top of that, Bucholtz constantly brings it back to psychology, the emotions that drive our decisions. Think about it. Fear, greed. Hope these are all tied to cycles too.
It makes you wonder, are we just puppets of these larger cosmic forces? Is it the moon making me hit that buy button? Okay, maybe that's a bit dramatic, but I see your point.
Well, let's not discount the possibility entirely. But seriously, even if we don't fully understand the mechanisms at play, the idea that our emotions, and therefore our trading decisions, are influenced by larger cycles, that's worth paying attention to.
It's like having another layer of awareness, right? Understanding not just the what and the how of the market, but also the when and maybe even the why. But before we get too far down that rabbit hole, let's bring it back to practicality. We've covered some really unconventional stuff today, and I don't want our listeners to think they have to adopt every single technique. It's about being discerning, right?
Couldn't agree more. This isn't about blindly following someone else's system. It's about taking what resonates with you, testing it out, and seeing if it enhances your understanding, your approach to the market.
Exactly. It's like trying on different lenses until you find the one that brings the market into sharp focus for you. So for our listeners who are intrigued by all of this, by the golden mean, planetary influences, those uncanny chart patterns, I highly recommend checking out The Lost Science for yourself. But here's the key. Go in with a critical mind. Don't just accept everything at face value. Test it out, see what happens, and maybe, just maybe, you'll discover a hidden edge in the market.
And who knows, you might even start seeing those cosmic connections everywhere you look.
Now, wouldn't that be something? Expert speaker, thank you so much for diving deep with us today. It's been enlightening, to say the least.
The pleasure was all mine. These explorations are always a highlight for me.
And to all our deep divers out there, thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this exploration into the world of the lost science, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts, your questions, your wildest theories. Find us on social media or drop us an email. Until next time, keep your minds open, your charts handy, and never stop exploring those hidden corners of knowledge.